Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Brown, and I'm the Executive Director of Transportation Energy Partners, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar. We are going to focus today on the fiscal year 2021 appropriations process, which is beginning to get underway with lots of deadlines happening right about now. And talk about our strategy for ensuring funding for clean fuels and vehicles and infrastructure through the Department of Energy Clean Cities Program, the Environmental Protection Agency's diesel emission reduction grants, and also the Department of Transportation's CMAC Program, which stands for Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. So that's what we're going to talk about today is federal funding for clean fuels and vehicles and infrastructure. Before we get started, just remind folks, if you have a question, type it into the question box and we will try and get to everybody's questions. Let's see, there we go. Next slide. So quick and big thank you to all of our sponsors. Without the support of our many sponsors, our work would not be possible. So we really appreciate your support and the great work that you all are doing to advance cleaner fuels and vehicles. For those of you who don't know us, Transportation Energy Partners is a national nonprofit organization. We support the nation's nearly 90 clean cities coalitions around the country and our 15,000 stakeholders in the clean transportation industry. We focus on keeping coalitions and their stakeholders informed of key federal policies, programs, and funding opportunities. And we also focus on educating decision makers in the Congress and the various federal agencies about the importance of strategies for advancing markets for clean fuels and vehicles. As many of you know, hopefully many of you were at our recent Energy Independence Summit in Washington, D.C. If not, you missed a lot of fun, a lot of great networking and business opportunities, and a lot of significant impact on the Congress and federal agencies. There were 160 Clean Cities Coalition and industry leaders there. We had more than 240 meetings with congressional offices, roundtables with top industry leaders, and also roundtable discussions and meetings with the Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Agriculture to learn about all of their programs and funding opportunities and policy priorities for the coming year. So it was a great event. If you didn't make it this year, hope you'll make it next year. And it's an important event for moving our policies and programs and funding forward. I think as many of you know, last year was a big year for the clean transportation industry, working with our industry partners in the electric vehicle, natural gas, propane, biofuels, and hydrogen industries. We were successful in extending the various tax incentives for alternative fuels. The biodiesel incentive, as most of you know, was extended through 2022, and the others were extended through the end of this year. That's the good news. The bad news is for natural gas, propane, infrastructure, and fuel cell vehicles, we need to be, and we are working on extension again right now because those incentives are going to expire again at the end of 2020 this year. We also had success in the funding arena. The Clean Cities program was increased, funding was increased to $40 million. The Congress also provided $20 million in new funding for up to 5 electric vehicle community partner projects. The DOE just recently accepted concept papers for those projects, as well as the Clean Cities Technology Integration Competitive Grants. So hopefully some of you submitted concept papers to apply for those monies or were part of teams. The EPA diesel emission reduction grants was funded at $87 million. And we also got some language included to have a sort of short-term partial solution of the problem we've had with the Federal Highway Administration not approving funding for clean vehicle projects through the CMAC program, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. They retroactively, they're supposed to approve some clean vehicle projects as long as the projects were submitted prior to April of 2018. Today we're going to talk about solving that program, not just backwards, but also forwards and into the future. So those were the successes last year. And in terms of our priorities, working with all of you and our many partners, our top priorities this year are again to extend the tax incentives, to increase funding for clean cities and the EPA diesel emission reduction grants, to continue to fight to preserve the renewable fuel standard and increase volumes for this RFS. Again, to encourage the Federal Highway Administration to approve Buy America waivers and free up CMAC funding for vehicle projects, to include alternative fuels in any new infrastructure initiatives, and also to authorize the Clean Cities program, Department of Energy Clean Cities program. So those are our priorities for the current year. In terms of, and then what we're really going to talk to are these 3 items, which are our appropriations funding priorities for the year. And the reason we're focused on these is because the appropriations process is getting underway right now, and we need to be very active in having all of you across the country support our funding requests. So our top priorities are $50 million for the Clean Cities program, including $30 million for competitive deployment grants, $100 million for the EPA diesel emission reduction grants program, and then language that would require the Federal Highway Administration to resume funding in an ongoing way of clean vehicle and infrastructure projects. So first, it's important to understand the federal appropriations process and timeline. So the president proposed his budget, which we'll talk a little bit about shortly, on February 10th. And then the next item, the next key point in the timeline in the process is that every appropriation subcommittee, there are 12 appropriation subcommittees in the House, each in the House and Senate, and they each write their own appropriations bills that fund the particular agencies. So for example, there's a subcommittee called the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, and they fund the Department of Energy. amongst other agencies. And then there's the Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee, and they fund the Environmental Protection Agency and also the Department of Interior. And there are 10 other of those subcommittees which each write their own bills. Every member of the House and Senate has the opportunity to submit requests to each of the subcommittees to let them know their funding priorities for the year. So our focus is getting as many members of the House and Senate to submit our requested funding levels to the subcommittees, because these subcommittees are where the action is. So they will write their bills and pass those bills in April, May, and June. And the members have to get their requests into the subcommittees. In the House, the deadlines start on March 17th, and the Senate, I don't believe the Senate set their deadlines yet, but they're coming up soon, and they'll start towards the end of the month. Then there will be, the subcommittees will write their bills and pass them in April, May, and June, and then typically the House and Senate, full House and Senate will vote on the bills in the summer or early fall, and then we'll have final legislation hopefully in the fall. I think likely this year it's possible they'll get a few bills done before the election, the less controversial bills, but any of the more controversial bills probably won't be finalized until after the election in November. And that, in recent years, that is not unusual. So very quickly, here's a rundown of the key appropriations leaders, the subcommittee's chair and ranking members. These are the key people who write the bills with input from their colleagues. It's good to take special note if you happen to be from one of the states, like if you're from Tennessee or California or Ohio or Idaho, you have even more influence because your members are actually writing those bills. So again, the Energy and Water Subcommittee will write the bill that deals with clean cities and the vehicle technologies budget at the Department of Energy. The Interior and Environment Subcommittee will determine the level of funding for the EPA diesel emission reduction grants, and the Transportation HUD Subcommittee will determine oops, there's a mistake there, just to correct. It's not Senator Tom Udall there. It should say Senator Jack Reed, who's from Rhode Island, is the Senate ranking member. So I apologize for that, but these are the folks who will deal with the Department of Transportation and the CMAC funding that we were talking about. So Clean Cities funding, give you a little bit of history. You can see how we've been successful in slowly increasing the program little by little over the past few years. Unfortunately, the administration, as shown in the slide here, requested only $74 million for the overall Vehicle Technologies Program, and they requested zero funding for the Clean Cities Program. And that represents, for the overall Vehicle Technologies Program, an 81% cut from last year. That's the bad news. The good news is it's ultimately up to Congress, so don't be alarmed here. They also requested these kinds of levels last year as well. So we are working with Congress, and I'm confident that we will see levels a lot closer to last year's levels as opposed to what the administration is proposing. Again, our recommendation, we're requesting language which would include $50 million for the program, which is up from 40 million last year. The funds should be used for deployment of vehicles and infrastructure. I think as most most of their funds are used for research and development, which is also important, but here's fun. These are a small amount of funds that are actually used for actually implementing and testing out and demonstrating new technologies and new strategies and approaches. Our language requests, and this was included last year, that DOE is encouraged to give, we consider these kind of small to medium-sized grants rather than large grants, and that's so the money will be spread out and more people have an opportunity to receive the funds. And our language also requires that coalitions are project participants, and we've seen DOE include that language in their recent funding opportunity announcement, which is a good thing, and that's been directed by Congress. Here's our language, which says all of those bullets, which I'm not going to read to you. So that's DOE Clean Cities. In terms of the EPA diesel emission reduction grants, again, you can see how these funds have also been slowly increasing over this year, over the years. Again, our request is for $100 million, and the administration, at least they didn't request zero for this program, they requested $10 million. But again, don't be alarmed. Congress will determine the overall funding levels. And then this is our language that we're proposing that would actually be legislative language that would be included to correct the Federal Highway Administration CMAC program issue we have. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you a quick rundown. So basically, for many years, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, or CMAC as it's known, which is run by the Federal Highway Administration, has been really probably the biggest source of federal funding in an ongoing way for clean fuels and vehicles and infrastructure. Essentially, these are monies that are passed down to the states and in some states, regional metropolitan planning organizations to do projects which reduce congestion or improve air quality. And one strategy that many states and regions have used to improve air quality is to help fleets transition their vehicles to cleaner fuels and vehicles. And it's been a great source of money. For example, New York City has spent tens of millions, if not more, in transitioning their fleets. The city of Chicago is about to engage into a major project with millions of dollars. The Dallas area in Texas, North Central Texas COG, and the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalitions have used CMAC funds for CNG garbage trucks, for propane school buses, and for some other light-duty vehicles, and projects like this have happened all over the country. And the problem is that in a 1983 law, which includes the Buy America requirements for the Federal Highway Administration, and this law was these requirements were written for iron and steel content in roads and bridges. And it basically says that virtually 100% of the iron and steel in roads and bridges funded by the Federal Highway Administration has to be steel and iron made in America. But there's a process to waive that in certain circumstances. So for years, the vehicle projects and infrastructure projects were exempt from this requirement. However, when during the previous administration, when they came out with the Recovery Act stimulus program, there was a big focus on Buy America, and the CMAC funds for clean vehicles and other projects got frozen because they didn't know what to do with the Buy America requirements. And the problem is that it's impossible to require and certify that all 100% of the iron and steel in cars, including all engine components and spark plugs and screws and pieces of metal, are American-made steel. And it's just not practical. And the agency realized that, so we worked with them, and they came up with a process where they would approve waivers and allow funding to move forward as long as the vehicles were assembled in the U.S. And that worked fine until the new administration came in, and then they have frozen the funds, and we've been unable to get them to use the same criteria in the past or to use any criteria. And so basically, they've funded no projects for the last several years. Since 2018 was 2 years ago was the last time they approved any projects. So this language will fix this on a going forward basis. So we're working with the House and Senate Appropriations subcommittees on this language. So what is our strategy? So our strategy is for you all, with our assistance, to send letters or forms getting your members of the House and Senate to request our proposed language and funding levels to the various appropriation subcommittees. So that is the key point that we're in. And then after you submit these requests, to follow up with your congressional offices to make sure that they submit your requests to the subcommittee. So we are sending forms requesting your House and Senate members to make requests of the subcommittees. And so far, we've submitted 73 House and 39 Senate requests, working in partnership with you all. And our goal is to have at least 100 House and 60 Senate requests. We're having this webinar today because the deadlines are upon us. And here's quickly some of the things that they ask for in there. Each House and Senate office basically has their own process where they take requests from their constituents and stakeholders. And these are typically some of the information that they ask for on the forms. You know, your contact information, which of the subcommittee bills your request is for, which agency or department, which office or individual agency, what's the account, whether it's if you have a language request, what the language is, then like a couple of paragraphs justifying the request. Sometimes they ask for the president's budget request. They ask if this was included in prior years, and sometimes they ask if other members are requesting the language. So this is just to give you a sense of what to expect. And if you have, we are here to help you get these in and help you fill out the forms. Some offices just require a letter, no form, but every office has its own process. So we can help you figure out the process. We can help you get the forms. We can help you get them in, but it has power if it comes from you all. So key deadlines. So we are right now at deadline time. If you look at the second bullet here, you can see these are the second level of bullets, those deadlines with dates where it says energy and water, March 17th, interior environment, March 20th, transportation HUD, March 17th. Those are the subcommittee deadlines. So the members of the House who are making requests have to have their requests into the subcommittees by those dates. So they have deadlines happening right now. Most of the House deadlines are this week. Some have passed. Most of the Senate are this week and next week. A few have passed. If the deadlines are passed, they'll still usually accept your request, especially if you call up and ask, or if you ask us to do that for you, or if we work together on it. But again, this is the process. These are the deadlines. And then the subcommittees will, or the Senate has not set their deadlines yet, but they're likely to be end of March to the early to mid-April. So they're a little behind the House, and that's also typical for the process. But this is happening right now. We're very busy helping people do this stuff, so we're available if you need help. So, and we need your help. The more people who make these requests and get their members to make the request, the more successful we're going to be in achieving our language and funding objectives in this process. Let's see what's next. So again, key next steps. If you haven't already, figure out the deadlines for your congressional offices, fill out the form or send a letter right now. For the Senate, maybe next week. If you can get your stakeholders to join in and make it a coalition request, even better, and then follow up with the offices afterwards. Again, this is a very important year to continue to make sure that these programs are supported. As you know, this administration, at least in their budget, has provided minimal support for the programs. Ultimately, as we've discussed, it's up to Congress. But Congress responds to the squeaky wheel. So it's up to us to be heard and to get our requests in and make sure that members of the House and the Senate and of these appropriations subcommittees know how important these programs are to our industry. And it's up to us to make that happen. With that, thank you again to our many sponsors. Here's our contact information. You can reach myself or Jacob. We'll have these slides and the recording up on our website and send you out a link to it. We have sample letters if you need a letter. I'd like to see if anybody's got any questions. Don't see any questions yet. Except somebody commenting they hear no sound. Hopefully you've heard my sound. Any questions out there? All good on the sound. That's good. Thank you, Paul Jensen. Any questions on the appropriations process? our requests. Seeing no questions, I think, oh, there's a question. I see one. How likely is it, hang on, that Congress will fund? I think it's highly likely that, I don't know exactly what level, but the Clean Cities program was funded at $40 million last year. In addition, there was an additional $20 million for the electric vehicle community partnership projects. And, you know, I'm hopeful that we'll be at least at the level of last year. And then maybe we can get an increase. Funding or get an increase, we have to engage in the process. So it's important to be active. And then another question is, can you send the model letter out to all of us who are on the webinar? And the answer to that is yes, we will do that. We will make the sample letters available to everybody. We'll send you a link to where you can get them. All right, last call for questions. Seeing no questions and knowing that all of you are very busy, I want to thank everybody again for participating. Thanks to all of you who have already been working on this. And those of you, again, if you need help, please email or call myself or Jacob. Our contact information is right here. And we will help you out. Make sure these requests get submitted. Thanks again, and look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.